You have tuned into The Voice of Medicine, the medical podcast filled with remarkable stories, first-hand experience, important research, and valuable life lessons. Open your mind, relax, and enjoy. Hello, everybody, and a wonderful Saturday to all of you. First of all, I want to say thank you for all the supporters of the podcast that we're doing, The Voice of Medicine. I'm very happy that some of you are writing us comments by now on YouTube or on other platforms. I'm also very happy for the emails that we started to get, and I would encourage everybody else who has an idea about a possible podcast topic, or if you want to, for example, hear a podcast with a specific guest, just please let us know. Any feedback is great. We're very grateful for the responses that we get. And I want to tell you that today's episode is basically sort of like a follow-up for the episode that I had with Rebecca Love. If you remember, I talked to Rebecca about nursing, and specifically nursing innovation, but also, the problems with burnout in all the nursing fields. Now, today I'm going to talk to Dr. Bonnie Clipper. Bonnie is a colleague and a friend from Rebecca, and we're going to talk about the two books that Bonnie wrote. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy this follow-up. So sit tight in your chairs and enjoy. Bonnie, hi. Happy that you're on my podcast.
Thank you so much.
So, Bonnie, when I was considering the topics for our talk, I tried to find things that, I haven't really talked to with Rebecca Love about. Although repetition might be, as we say, mother of wisdom, I believe it's always nice for our listeners to have a little bit more. And I'm sure that you have also more to tell us. So I would like to start with one of your books, which you wrote, in which, and correct me please at any time, you were discussing the work relations of intergenerational teams. So what happens when basically you have the younger and the older generation, working together in the field of nursing. And I would like you to tell us a little bit more about this. So what happens in such a nursing team? What did you see? What were sort of the issues that you could observe, and, the general take on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, I wrote that book in 2012, and that book is really around how leaders and managers can think through working with a team when the team has people from different generations or different kind of backgrounds, if you will, in terms of their age and their thought process. So essentially, it's interesting because each generation was, of course, they were born at a different time and they grew up at a different time. And that time tends to shape how you think. And as we've seen a progression over many, many years, we have gone from certainly a world where, it used to, let's use the example of kind of media. There was radio, and then there was black and white TV, and then there was color TV, and there's computers, and there's streaming, and we have these handheld devices called smartphones. So each generation grew up with different technology. Each generation has grown up with different ways to communicate. Each generation has grown up with a different set or a different perception of values and morals. So when you communicate to those groups, it's very different for each group. And you have to understand the differences so that you can communicate and convey information to every group that you work with, no matter their generation. And we also have to learn how not to stereotype each other and to appreciate each other so that we can work together better.
This is definitely a complex topic. I think anytime somebody mentions the word communication, I'm already rolling my eyes because I think, wow, well, this is not going to be easy. It sounds easy to say, well, you need to speak to different people in a different way, but what does it actually mean exactly? And then what you mentioned is that since everybody grew up in a different way, and there are these cohort effects, right? So you, for example, have people, I don't know, from the 60s, 70s, they had different challenges growing up than, for example, people in these days, if we can still call it challenges. And you mentioned very well also the stereotypes that we have. So, for example, I mean, it's sort of a stereotype to say that all young people these days are entitled and snowflakey, right? They don't have the grit that the generations before had. I would like you to, for example, give us some hands-on concrete cases that you could show us how, well, a person in a managing position could really communicate accordingly with the people from the different age groups.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's use communication as an example, right? When you, as a leader, are talking to a person that is of the traditionalist generation, the thought process behind a question is that you will provide me with an answer. And that answer, if I am a traditionalist and I'm asking you a question as my manager, for example, in nursing, maybe the question is, can I change schedules? Mm-hmm. If I'm asking you a question and you are the manager, as a traditionalist, in my mind, I am willing to give you probably 4 to 5 days to think through that and answer that question. And the reason is that my frame of reference quite often is that during my formative years, which end by the time you graduate high school, my formative years, what I saw as a traditionalist was that I saw questions were usually answered through correspondence in the mail. So I would write a question or send off a query via a letter. I would send it to someone. They would write me a reply back. So in my mind, I'm giving you 4 to 5 days to answer the question of, can I change my schedule? Mm-hmm. If I'm a boomer, was born at a different time, and that time would probably have been a phone call to an office. So I would place a phone call, I would ask for someone, I would locate that person, I would ask them my question, and they would say, I'm going to get back to you. And that probably would have taken 2 to 3 days. So mm-hmm. in my mind, as a boomer, I'm probably giving you about 2 to 3 days to answer that. As an Xer, I would speed that time frame up and probably say, I'm used to placing a call and getting an answer while I'm on that call. So probably less than 24 hours to give me an answer, right? And again, this is based on my formative years. If I am a millennial, I was born during the time that computers, internet existed. So the amount of time as a young child in my formative years that I could get information was essentially the amount of time that it took me to find something correctly on an online search and get an answer. So if you were to play that out and say, I'm a traditionalist asking my manager, can I change my schedule? I'm thinking if your answer is yes, give me a couple of days, that works fine for me. If I'm a boomer and I ask you as my manager, can I change my schedule? You would probably say, you know what, give me 2 days. As a boomer, I go, that's fine. Just give me an answer. If I am an Xer, it's different based on your generation. So, and you can see that in people, right? You can see that in millennials when they ask a question, they're expecting it immediately.
Wow. And here I thought people are just growing impatient. I have completely I could not foresee this explanation. Fascinating. Okay. So it's a different perception of time, or different, how would we call it?
Yeah, it's a different expectation based on information gathering, right? Because it happens so much faster now. You can literally go do an online search and find the answer to anything you want. Now, the answer may not be accurate, but you can find an answer immediately. So that's why that has changed. The whole perception of the time required to answer a question has changed.
So because we're interacting with machines, which can basically give us any answer at any moment extremely quickly, this is what we are transferring into communication. Is that the case?
Yes, it's a lot about what we're transferring, and it's also how we've grown up, so we know how to answer or to expect answers differently.
Where is the common ground for the generations then?
Well, we still we still all know how to answer questions. We still all know how to ask questions. We still all know how to communicate. So part of what we have to work on is where our expectations are, right? And this is what I like to call kind of generational harmony, because we have to understand each generation and how they're different. And then we have to also know how you work together and how you find the positives or the strengths and all that, so you can do what's necessary to be successful, to have units, departments run properly, and to have patient care happen in the best way possible. So we still all know how to communicate. We have to work with each other to communicate. And even some of the nuances, right? Words have changed meaning.
Oh, yeah.
So if you think about, what different words mean or how you express different things. So I'll give you a very small example here. It's not uncommon when you say to someone, thank you, it would be, and I'm going to use some generalities here, depending on the age group, you will get everything from you're welcome all the way down to no problem, right? So you can kind of predict where the you're welcome comes from, and you can also kind of predict where the no problem comes from. So as I like to say, I have 2 college kids. So if I say to them, thank you, and they say no problem, I like to say to them, I didn't have a problem, and I didn't ask you if I had a problem, right? So the reply should be, you're welcome. However, words have changed over the generations. The meaning of them have changed, even simple things. And this is a little bit of a snarky example, but things such as, you used to be able to say, hey, I'm going to hook up with friends to go have a beer. Now you have to be careful if you say that term, because it means something very different.
Do you think that nursing change a lot through the fact that you get young people into the workforce? Although, of course, I know Rebecca already told me that there is not enough young people actually going into the workforce. That's why nurses in general, if you look at it, is just I would say, older growing workforce, which is a problem. But nevertheless, do young people, if they come to work as a nurse and stay in the workforce, are they changing the workforce in a way?
Yeah, so in 2016, what we saw was a shift. We went from a boomer-heavy nursing workforce to a millennial-heavy workforce. So the biggest bulk of nurses are millennials, which is great. That's awesome news for us. And we're also starting to see a shift into a very heavy presence of millennials as leaders in nursing, which I think is fantastic as well. So there's a lot of really positive things that are happening there. One of the areas that we struggle, though, is that we have about a 34% turnover rate of our new grad nurses at the 2-year mark. So when you think about that, we're producing young nurses, which is amazing, right? We really need them because they're energetic, they're creative, they're going to be awesome in the workforce. Yet the turnover rate is 34% at 2 years. So we have to figure out ways to keep those young nurses in nursing.
What do you think? How can we achieve that?
Well, nursing is it's a tough job, right? It's a difficult profession. So
Yeah.
I think there's kind of a plethora of issues, and we have to figure out how to solve each of the issues. So we have issues where we really do need to kind of figure out how to best care for patients in terms of what staffing models we can use. And I think that we continue to work through that, right? So much is changing, everything from how do we provide inpatient care to how do we provide outpatient care. So we have to figure out this staffing piece. I think we also have to figure out how do we allow nurses to do the things that they're best at and operate at the top of their license. We still have different states that have different kind of expectations and standards around that. So we have to figure that out as well. If we want to continue to attract young nurses, we have to make sure that our models as caregivers, as professionals, also incorporates things such as the emerging technologies. So I really see this as an incredible place where young nurses can get involved, and of course incumbent nurses as well, but really around the design and development of technology to assist us in providing patient care. So when you think about that, it means everything from having nurses very heavily presenced and very involved in How are we going to continue to enhance and increase the amount of care that we give outside the walls of a hospital?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we even increase the intensity of that? So we've heard for many years patients are going to be moving from inpatient to outpatient or to home care. Yet there's been some movement there, but not as much as we should see.
Mm-hmm.
So we really should have nurses more involved in designing those care models. We know there are pilots going on around the country where they're actually testing providing intermediate level care in patient homes. Nurses should be involved in that. So it's an opportunity for us as a profession to get involved. We also want to have nurses involved in more of the technology design and development. How do we know that some of the tech solutions that are coming on the market are actually nurse friendly, right? Do they meet the nursing workflows? Have nurses been involved in the design? How do we know those things are happening? And that's an area where I think that young nurses in particular can be extremely helpful because they really understand technology. So it's up to those of us that have been in nursing for a while to really collaborate and bring the right people together to help us problem solve to ensure that we're moving the right direction with our profession.
What I was thinking about as well is what happens to, let's say, the older members of the workforce in nursing who perhaps, I don't know, are not too old yet to basically be done with working, but sort of the system already tells them, yeah, you should move along. I'm trying to hear to get the topic of ageism a little bit, because that's something what I am actually seeing as a problematic. Because as the 60-year-old from today are not the 60-year-old from 200 years ago. So the functionality of the people keeps getting better and better in older age. And what I fear is happening is that we're losing valuable know-how that these people amassed over 30, 40 years of working with patients and colleagues, and it just goes to waste because, well, you achieved a certain age, there you go, you're a pensioner now.
Well, yeah, there's a couple really good nuggets in what you just said. So I think, that as we continue to hear that as a global kind of not only nursing profession, but right across the world in developed countries, what we continue to hear is that we literally function, act, perform, think 10 years younger than our numeric age, so 60 is the new 50 and 50 is the new 40 and those kind of things. So yes, we function better. The demands of the job of a nurse are still extremely hard on people's bodies. So when you think about it, working 12-hour shifts becomes more difficult when you're 60 than it was when you were 20 and 30. So I think that we have those challenges that we have to figure out, and we have to look at how can we create work environments and schedules that aren't kind of the same old thing that they have been forever, like 8-hour shifts, 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts. So I think that is going to cause us to be much more flexible. The downside of any change we make to scheduling is always consistency in patient care, right? So there's a direct relationship that we have to figure out there. The other thing, too, is that I think we're going to have to look at how we can continue to retain our more tenured nurses in nursing. And those are going to be jobs like, for example, telehealth or screening for remote monitoring or things of that nature. So we're going to have to get very good at how we retain more experienced, more tenured, and you use the word older nurses in nursing.
Another thing which I was asking myself is how many men are actually these days interested in working as a nurse? And would you say that nursing is a men-friendly environment? We have a lot of talk these days about how there should be quotas, for example, for women to be on, some boards of corporate or corporate companies. But I'm asking myself, why not, for example, have a quota for men being in the nursing force or in, other, I would say, right now, female-dominated work fields?
Yeah, that's a really good question, though. Probably touchy point, isn't it? So when you think about it, We, at least in the United States, our workforce is 90% female. So 10% male. And it's been hovering around that for quite a while. So, I think that's one of the things that in our country, we would love to see more men enter nursing. And we continue to see more men, yet we also are seeing more women. So it really hovers around that kind of 90-ish% female dominated in our country. I think there are a couple of things where we can probably help ourselves, right? One of the things is this really silly notion where when men enter nursing, we call them male nurses. That's such a silly thing, right? It's a nurse. It matters not if you're male or female.
Agreed.
You're a nurse. So it's silly little things
Mhm.
that we kind of do to ourselves. We also make these comments that I think we oftentimes don't realize that they seem insensitive, but we like to say, hey, if there's a guy that's, on your staff, great, let's have the guy do all the lifting. Like, those are things that I think we do and we don't mean to, that just sometimes don't help us help ourselves. So we have to be sensitive about how we do that. Now, is there some truth to that? You bet there's truth to that, right? But I think we have to be smarter kind of about how we talk about things. In our country, there are multiple organizations that are just dedicated to kind of men in nursing or the male nurse. So we really want to make sure that we treat everybody kind of equally as respectfully and as welcome to the profession. We have a gap of million plus nurses, so we really need everybody that's interested and can be a nurse. We need them all to participate.
I have this from a couple of friends who are physiotherapists, so not nurses, but physiotherapists. And they told me, well, the main problem that a man has, there is this weird, well, not tension, but maybe a weird atmosphere when, for example, a female patient is supposed to, I don't know, undress for the examination or so on.
And I don't know. Well, no, I mean, I kind of get where you're going, but I don't know the answer, right? I mean, people are people. Patients are men and women. Nurses are men and women.
That's how you see it. That's how I see it. But, the majority of people still have this, oh my God, like, no, he's a guy. I'm not going to. Why? I mean, he's a professional and he's there, for you, for health reasons. But still, there is this thing which then, in turn creates this inequality where even I'm pretty sure there is a lot of men out there that love to care for people, human beings genuinely, and they would be there, but somehow maybe they cannot.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing profession. So to me, it's just a matter of us getting the people in nursing that want to be in nursing and then help prop everybody up so they can do the best job possible. From a patient perspective, some of that is related to age and demographics. So I think over the course of time, we'll start to see that wash out. But I mean, I'm happy to have anybody that wants to be a nurse become a nurse, and as long as we can kind of support that, and we all have the right skills and competencies and expertise, I think everybody's welcome.
That's the essential message here. Thank you very much for summing it up. I think we can close the topic with that sentence. That was brilliantly said. Well, you and you, just like Rebecca, you're both strong advocates for innovation in nursing. And one of the things I was asking myself is, what innovations did nurses already contribute to healthcare that are maybe super important, but the general public doesn't even know about?
Oh, yeah. Nurses have a long history of being innovators. So the crash cart, which, we use certainly in emergent situations in hospitals, that was something that was developed by a nurse. Feeding tubes. That was a process, actually a device that was developed by a nurse. The ostomy bag, that was something that was developed by a nurse. So we have kind of a long history of those kinds of things, yet we haven't always done a good job of talking about them. And I'm sure Rebecca talked about, Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was the ultimate and the first innovator in nursing, right? I mean, she actually was the one that pointed out to physicians the fact that disease was being spread because they were not washing their hands or their coats or their instruments. So we go way back in our profession with innovation, and it continues to this day. We're seeing nurses invent all kinds of amazing things.
Speaking about nurses and innovation, the one thing, please be kind with me for the following rather critical question, but if we would encourage every nurse to somehow be, how should I say, an entrepreneur and maybe make a business out of her innovation idea, wouldn't we then have a problem because we just created a bunch of entrepreneurs with their companies and we don't have the nurses anymore? So aren't we making the problem even worse? Not having, worse nurses in the workforce, and now we are encouraging them to, go and make your own business. I mean, leave the workforce?
Well, you're assuming that every nurse that comes up with an idea will leave the workforce and leave to run their own company. And I think that that's absolutely not true. I would be delighted if all of the nurses that have an idea in their head could have that idea, fabricated, marketed, sold, and in use today. And I would assure you that the majority of them do not want to leave their jobs and run their own companies, but rather love being involved with patients in some way, shape, or form. So they're not mutually exclusive. I see it more as an and instead of an either or. Right? I think that you can invent a product, have it sold, have it on the market, and continue to be involved in the patient care world.
I see. Okay. So that's basically the gist of it. All right. Do you think that nurses these days are encouraged enough to do this?
I think that's a good question. Encouraged.
At least one.
Well, I think nurses are not all encouraged because they don't even know that they can. So part of it is we sometimes have a confidence problem. Nurses are natural innovators. We have all created workarounds or MacGyvered something. We are all positive deviants. We all have ideas in our heads that we have to get out of our heads and we can do something with. Our confidence problem is that we've been so often told that you're just a nurse. We need to not do that to ourselves, and we have to help support each other and our ideas to advance our work. We also don't understand how to advance our work. So that was one of the reasons that we wrote the book, The Nurse's Guide to Innovation, to help nurses get things out of their head and figure out how to actually make things, right? How do you protect your intellectual property? How do you find funding? How do you market? How do you write a business plan? So we wanted to help nurses do that. I think it's incumbent upon us as a profession to continue to prop each other up and see other nurses become successful.
Is this the purpose of the platform that you created? I think it's called Wambi.
No, so Wambi is the company that I work for, and that's an amazing platform that helps to support employee engagement and reduce clinician burnout. And that platform was actually developed by a brilliant young woman, Alex Corin. And that platform, what we do is we actually harvest information directly from patients and their families. And it can actually be passed right on directly to the clinical team members. So it allows us to gather feedback and recognition in real time. It can get forwarded or passed right on to the caregivers, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a physician, whether you're a therapist. And then it also allows leaders to kind of look at the dashboard to see where comments are coming from and who comments are about, right? It allows patients and families to give kind of a review, if you will, to their different members of the care team. And what we're seeing is that the majority of the feedback is positive. And when we implement in organizations, sometimes nurses kind of say, oh, jeepers, just one more thing. And yet they're delighted when they see the feedback from patients and families because it's overwhelmingly positive. So that's a really neat tool. And it's an amazing platform that we're seeing really cool outcomes with.
Would you say that this feedback that you created is also one of the support factors for nurses to stay in their job?
Yes. So where you're going is exactly right. So we believe this is one of the ways that we are going to mitigate or improve, reverse, if you will, the impact, the effects of burnout. Because what we're able to see is that when nurses or physicians get the feedback from patients, they feel very positive about that. They see, yes, appreciated. They see the meaning in what they're doing. They feel the value about them as a caregiver. So when they see that and they feel that, it really does sort of make them go, wow, I'm having a good day today. And as we all know, the more good days you have, the more likely you are to keep doing what you're doing. So we see this as a really neat way to start to chip away at the impact of that burnout is having on our clinical team.
Brilliant. That's all I can say. It's this is something what a lot of people underestimate when it comes to employees or teamwork. It's often it's the simple thank you, you have done a great job, or I appreciate the effort. But if people hear this, that's all that they need after a hard day at work to actually then satisfied go home and feel like they accomplished something. So I'm absolutely on board.
Well, absolutely. And it's really cool. And for us, what we've done is we actually gamified the platform. So when we do that, what we see is that the clinical team members go back into the platform regularly because they want to see how many kind of points they've received compared to everyone else on their unit. So as they continue to engage in the platform, what they're learning is what kind of little micro behavior changes they need to make to get more points. So it's a really neat ecosystem that we're seeing, and it's improving the patient experience as a result. Patients are feeling more empowered because they're giving real-time feedback and real-time recognition to members of the care team. So it's a really neat thing.
For the for the closing of this podcast, I thought I'm gonna do something different because usually I ask a closing question and I thought, what the heck. So Bonnie, if you like, you can ask me a closing question or you can choose your own statement or the topic that we would discuss.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Of the challenges that you see globally in nursing, what is one that you would say is very, very similar to what you're seeing in Switzerland or in Europe, perhaps as a whole, and similar to an issue that we are having here in the United States as well?
Well, if my information is correct, and I still remember my talk with Rebecca well, I think it's the very aggressive, not everywhere, but somewhere very aggressive downgrading in the numbers of nurses that you need to man the floors. I think that's the expression that you use, because of course, economical reason, right? Cutting down costs. And the actual necessity to have more than the actual number of present nurses, resulting in nurses being completely, I would say, thrown into the fire. I mean, if you are there, maybe two of you on several levels and several patients with different states of acuity, and you are the one who is responsible, well, good luck. I mean, you do this for a couple of weeks, and I believe that you are about to quit. Because that's something that you cannot morally, the moral responsibility that you bear, you cannot take that. So I would say that is the biggest problem these days, from what I can say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. It's unfortunate that we have the same challenge, but it's interesting. And I think, again, back to how we started this, is that it is going to be incumbent upon us as nurses to figure out how we fix these staffing issues, because we've not even begun to explore how we can use technology as a force multiplier to leverage nurses to operate at the top of our license. And that may mean that we have to give away lots of our tasks to ensure that we're kind of the coordinators and managers and drivers of the care process, and other people are backfilling us with much of that tasky behavior. So I think that's something that we're going to have to figure out how to spend a lot more time and do research and study and look at different emerging technologies. So I think you've said it well. It's a challenge that we all have and we need to figure out.
By the way, thank you for the question, because it brought me now to another question. So we're not ending yet. What I also experienced talking to a couple of nurses is the following. I mean, as a nurse, sooner or later you see a lot of suffering, right? Especially when certain, health conditions are painful, and or the patients themselves feel helpless. They're in a lot of pain. Things just get ugly sooner or later. And I think a lot of nurses do not have somebody outside the workforce. So I'm not talking about colleagues, but somebody who they could talk to about this, and perhaps, get sort of like a psychohygiene, if you know what I mean. So somebody who can take care of them, on a professional level, and give them the possibility to, let off some steam, so to say, mentally and emotionally, without somehow being, stigmatized. I think this might result, which I have also seen, not in everybody, because of course, this is a very individual thing. But I think if you see enough problems, suffering, and on an everyday basis, it can happen that what follows is a sort of a numb state. I wouldn't want that to happen to any number of nurses. So,
well, and you've described perfectly what compassion fatigue is, right? So,
that's what it's called.
Compassion
Okay.
fatigue. It definitely, it happens. We see this not only in nurses, but in physicians and other members of the clinical team. And essentially, it's kind of what happens over a period of time where you lessen your amount of compassion, right? So there has been a great deal of research on that, and there are a lot of resources even that are available online. There are different compassion fatigue projects, different compassion fatigue organizations. So there's a great deal of help online, and there are certain groups that are really kind of digging into how to deal with that. So a lot of work that's been done. But you're right. When nurses get to a certain point in their careers, it's important to have support and to have resources to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because without taking care of yourself, it's very difficult to take care and give of yourself to others.
Well, then I learned something new too.
Awesome.
Bonnie, thank you very much for your time. It was really a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the invite and for the time. I really had fun and appreciate that.
This was The Voice of Medicine. Make sure you tune in next time, and take care.